Imagine this scene. It's pitch black, dead of night. A man is levered out of a window into a 4-foot wide basket. It's maybe as high as 60 feet off the ground. It would be fatal if he fell. And the cane woolen basket creaks under the strain of his weight. It crashes into vines and bushes growing on the wall on the way down. Maybe it's making too much noise, thinks the man sitting in the basket. Am I going to get through this alive? Is this my last night? Will my pursuers hear? Are they waiting for me at the bottom? After an eternity, through the darkness, the basket touches the ground, and out leaps a balding man in his 30s. Freedom? Not really. He just scuttles away into the dark desert night. This is the Apostle Paul. This is going to be one of the most powerful men in history. And look at him, scuttling away into the night. The Apostle Paul never expected to make an exit like this in his life. He was the son of a wealthy merchant from a big city, brilliant at studies, connected at the highest levels of Jewish society. A man of position and power. He had come to this city of Damascus with an ambassadorial status. He had a whole retinue of police and servants at his command, and in his bag he carried letters of diplomatic immunity to conduct religious cleansing. And yet, here he is, knuckles white, as he grips the sides of the basket. He's no longer an ambassador, he's a fugitive. And see him scampering away into the night with nothing but his clothes. Oh, and the gospel, recently discovered, because Jesus had appeared to him in this city and transformed his life. Why is Paul in the basket at all? People are after him. He's on the run. And you can imagine him sitting in this basket saying, this God, he's dangerous to know. One moment I was heading for a glittering career as a rabbi, but now, after encountering him, I'm on the run for my life. And the people that had educated Paul and commissioned him to persecute Christians have now turned on him because he's changed sides. There is a sense in which every Christian has changed sides. And that's where the trouble comes from. Because when we turn to Christ, we are pursued by a whole host of forces that didn't take much interest in us before. And the world in which we live is no longer a playground, it's a battleground. Who's after Paul? Well, the Jewish leaders in Damascus. They're very annoyed because he's come to the synagogues, he's preached the gospel, and they weren't able to answer him. And they're jealous and they're mad. And so they're after him. They're going to silence him. It doesn't help, of course, that he's got a bit of a history. This is the city he was supposed to come to and get rid of the Christians. And here he is, speaking on behalf of the Christians. How galling for them. And there's another group that's after him too, because when Paul's talking about this incident later to the Corinthians, he says that actually guards were waiting for him outside the city. The guards of the king of Arabia, King Aretas. And this is probably because, he tells us in Galatians, that early on he went to Damascus, encountered Christ, and then he left Damascus and went into Arabia for 3 years. And then he came back to Damascus. So something happened in Arabia to annoy the king and pursue Paul. Probably Paul was preaching. He usually was. And everywhere he preached, he got into trouble. So it seems that King Aretas has his guards outside the city because King Aretas' writ did not run into Damascus. Paul is getting it from both angles. Inside the city, the religious leaders are after his neck. Outside the city, the guards from a king are waiting to arrest him. All because he has an incendiary gospel. And so Paul learns early on that the life of faith involves being pursued, and he was to be on the run for the rest of his life. This God is dangerous to know. And that's the meaning of the word persecution. It just means to be pursued. It's a verb. So we all sit in the basket with Paul. Something or someone is always after us, not because of who we are, but because of Christ in us. The great New Testament scholar, William Barclay, once said that a New Testament Christian has three characteristics. 1, they were absurdly happy. 2, they were filled with an irrational love for their enemies. 3, they were always in trouble. Always in trouble. That's the default setting for any Christian. And Paul is to write later in his ministry that he expects every Christian to experience this pursuit. All who want to live a godly life in Christ Jesus, he says, will be persecuted. In 2 Timothy, he writes that. So, who's after you? Who's after me? If we sit in the basket with Paul, we have to ask, if Christ has enemies, then so must I. Sometimes the battle comes to us, but sometimes we have to take the battle to the enemy. Paul wasn't having to flee because he was a Christian. Paul was fleeing because he was a witnessing Christian. And we need to remember this. Jesus said, love your enemies. But he didn't say, don't make any. When you sit in the basket with Paul, you're always gripping the sides and saying, who's after me? Who's after me? Somebody should be. We all should be in that basket at some point. And if someone isn't, we need to gently ask ourselves, why not? There was a preacher, Charles Spurgeon, who once said, the devil doesn't waste his time flogging a dead horse. And the persecuted of the world will testify that when you experience that pursuit, strangely, you will count it as your greatest honor. Maybe it's time to get back into the basket with Paul and ask, who's after me?